Hi everyone, today is the day. Welcome to our special event, Inbound 2.0, why inbound demand generation is the future of marketing. We're Blend and we specialize in demand generation and creating HubSpot websites that drive demand and increase revenue for businesses. And today I'm joined by Phil, who's co-founder and director at Blend. So Phil, you looking forward to this?
Absolutely. Hi Dan, hi everybody. Really excited to talk about this today because something that we've been working on and refining, for a long time behind the scenes, and it's really relevant now. So thrilled to be talking to everyone about it.
Yeah, same. So yeah, I mean, me and Phil are just joining up today to talk through our proven methodology for marketing, which is inbound demand generation. And I suppose if you're wondering why now, why is it we're talking about inbound demand generation today? Well, I think we all know the B2B marketing landscape is rapidly changing and buyer preferences and behavior are rapidly evolving. And it seemed like the right time to share our proven approach to marketing that's helped us and clients drive a consistent and sustainable pipeline. I mean, ultimately, we want to help you adopt a new way of marketing that leans into today's buyer behavior and really gives you the competitive advantage that you need. So, what are we covering today? So, we're going to go through the driving forces behind inbound demand generation, what inbound demand generation actually is, how it's different to other marketing methodologies, why it's the most effective method for converting today's buyers, and lastly, how it actually gives you a competitive advantage. So, if you do have any questions, please do just ask away in the comments on LinkedIn and then we can bring them up. But unlike our usual events where we pick them up as we go along, which is great, but this time we're going to answer them all at the end, if that's okay, so we can deliver this information to you in the most fluid and flowing way possible. So that would be great if you don't mind, and we'll answer them at the end. So, Phil, I think you're going to kick us off and talk about the first point, which is the driving forces behind inbound demand generation.
Yeah, let's see if we can cover that. So, Blend is a B2B marketing agency founded by myself and my co-founder, Sean Sweet. And we've always been on a mission to identify the most reliable ways to produce predictable and valuable outcomes for our clients. And so, what that's meant over time is that we were never really satisfied with generating simply traffic, and we weren't particularly satisfied with generating simply leads either. We ultimately always wanted to be able to prove that we were generating revenue, or the next best thing, pipeline, from a marketing standpoint. So we've always been driven to pursue these goals and find reliability in the ways that we achieve them so that we can deliver again and again for the same clients and for new clients. Now, when we started the business in 2010, outbound marketing methods and brochure websites, they were on their knees. They were ceasing to be effective. You couldn't buy lists and blast out emails and get a response rate anymore. A website that just presented information wasn't effective at, educating or engaging leads. And so those methods were already on the way out when we got started. Pretty soon, we, like a lot of others, saw potential and promise in content marketing and inbound marketing. And I would go as far as to say that was the beginning of the inbound era, really. And we adopted inbound marketing because it proved itself pretty quickly to be reliable in terms of generating traffic and leads. And it had a positive impact, but not as big an impact on producing pipeline for our clients. But nevertheless, it had those elements of reliability and predictability that we always look for. So, we really did adopt inbound and build our team and our processes around it with some success. But it didn't take long for us to realize that there's a pretty fundamental problem with B2B inbound marketing, even back then. And it is that leads simply don't buy. Time and time again, we've seen the same story played out in the data from the inbound marketing programs we've built, we've witnessed, we've optimized, and any that we've had the pleasure to sort of look under the hood of. And inbound marketing is really focused on generating top of the funnel leads. But no matter how those leads are nurtured or scored, the conversion rate into customer tends to be pretty abysmal. Often, when you're looking over, say, a 12-month period, pretty close to zero in some cases. Those leads that you go to such great effort to generate just don't go on to buy from you. Meanwhile, the close rate from buyers who remained entirely anonymous until they willingly, voluntarily indicated their intent to purchase at the bottom of the funnel, so to speak, was far, far higher. And those leads accounted for the vast majority of closed revenue in most cases. And we saw it again and again. And if you watching have seen any of the great material from Chris Walker at Refine Labs or Alistair Corsi at Cognism, who are very vocal on this topic, you'll know that we're not alone in observing this pattern in a variety of marketing programs and strategies. And it's certainly true with inbound marketing as well. Now, over the intervening years, we've been noticing and we've been sort of aligning and adapting to this conundrum. It's only worsened or it's only deepened. Serious buyers hold on to their anonymity and their privacy more than ever. And in addition, as we've seen from Gartner's recent report, the new B2B buying journey, the buying process of the modern B2B buyer has become significantly more complicated, more convoluted, and more unpredictable than ever before. So with those two things combined, as a result, inbound marketing, with its focus on lead generation and lead nurturing, really isn't aligned to the modern buyer anymore. And of course, it's all about being aligned to the buyer and being customer-centric. But the inbound philosophy that underpins it, of sharing your knowledge widely and freely and giving value before you expect to extract it, remains as powerful as ever, we've found. And that's what led us to the adoption of inbound demand generation as a new iteration of the methodology. So what is inbound demand generation? I'm sure you're all asking. Fundamentally, it is inbound marketing still optimized for the creation of pipeline and revenue, highlighted here, over the generation of leads. And it's achieved by applying that inbound philosophy of sharing and giving your knowledge and educating to the three stages of what we call the demand generation funnel or journey or process. So looking initially at what makes up demand generation, it's broken into three stages, as you can see here. And the one I want to talk about perhaps most is demand creation, because it's perhaps newest to a lot of inbound marketers, and a bit more of a deviation from their way of working previously. Demand creation is the part of demand generation that's all about originating intent among the portion of your audience who are not actively looking to purchase. Now, of course, at any one time, the vast majority of your ideal customers are not actively looking to make a purchase of something in your category. For them to start researching a purchase of some sort, something needs to have happened to move them out of the non-purchasing mode and into the researching mode, into the purchase process. Something has to have created demand for that to take place. Now, if you wait until demand has been created, you can still capture it, which we'll come on to next, but it's more likely that you'll be an also-ran in that process, something to compare to the preferred solution as opposed to being the front runner. Whereas if you adapt your marketing to be the ones creating demand for your category, your product, your business, you will generate pre-existing affinity for your brand and preference, which will carry over into the research and purchase phases, putting you in a really strong position to win the business. So being the brand to create the demand in the first place improves your potential throughout the rest of the purchase process and helps you talk to the vast majority of your audience that are not looking to buy right now. Demand capture is what happens afterwards. So once demand has been created and buyers have some sort of intent and turn to intent channels to further their research into the problem, the solution, the vendors, and so on. They turn to their intent channels to pursue that process. Capture is focused on being found in the channels they use to pursue that research, pursue that process. For example, search, still a key one at the demand capture stage. To get them onto your website, where you can provide a website experience that's effective at getting them to convert into a high intent lead, somebody who's voluntarily, willingly showing you, telling you that they have a high level of intent to purchase something like what you offer, and they're prepared to talk to you about it, not a top of the funnel lead at the beginning of the research process. And then once captured, demand, of course, needs to be converted into revenue by either your sales function or your sales process. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment. Now, in order to build an inbound demand generation funnel, you need certain foundations to be in place. The strategy for inbound demand generation is one that identifies who your audience is, of course, the channels that they can be reached in and on, and the topics and themes that will resonate with them at all the different stages of the purchase process. And this strategy will guide the customer journey that you create, the content and campaigns that you execute, and where and how you activate and promote them so that they get found and seen and discovered and consumed by your buyers. A distinct and relevant and memorable brand is essential for building trust and credibility and recall with buyers over potentially long buying cycles and even longer periods of not buying. Let's remember that most people are not actively searching for a solution of any kind in your category right now. Brand aesthetics, the look, the design, the logo, the identity, these are all important factors, but it's more than that. Messaging and positioning are equally important and must be clear, concise, and compelling to play that important role over the very long process that a purchase might take. And finally, technology is it's essential these days, and it must provide a frictionless, connected experience for a buyer as they go through all these long processes. A single view of the customer for you so that you're able to understand what's happening and respond as effectively and efficiently as possible. And must make multi-channel marketing that's integrated across this whole buying journey, really easy for you to orchestrate and measure so that you can execute, iterate, optimize, and develop new campaigns as you go along. And then finally, it's usually a critical part of the solution to providing a seamless handoff to sales so that that vital last part of the journey can be friction-free and easy for the buyer, and you are able to turn that into revenue at the end of the process. So with those foundations in place, you're in a position to start executing your inbound demand generation strategy. So what's that all about? Inbound demand gen begins, like many things, with content. You still need to create the content that your buyers need and want at different stages of the buying journey. That's still a requirement. As before, this includes content that educates them, that helps them, that reassures them, content that differentiates you, addresses objections, and so on. We still need all of that. Crucially, you're not going to be optimizing any of that content specifically for lead generation. By driving visits from social and search to gated landing pages so that people can download it to see it. Instead, you're going to focus on publishing content in ways that can be easily consumed by your buyer freely without converting, and easily repurposed by you for use across the different channels that are necessary to reach them throughout this purchasing process and non-purchasing process. With your content at hand, next you need to distribute that content to the places your buyers are when and where it is relevant to them. So this includes while they're not in market for your type of solution. Now, what that looks like will depend on your unique business situation, but it might include organic and paid social, SEO and PPC, your blog, resources and website, and more potentially. What's being seen generally, though, is that social media and communities are becoming far more effective and instrumental at the demand creation stage, and buyers' use of search and websites and your content on your website is being reserved much more for the phase after intent has been, after intent exists, after demand has been created. And so it's moved down the purchase process somewhat. It's no longer a great way to stimulate the creation of new demand. We're seeing that drift to the places people spend their time, such as social. So that's worth bearing in mind too. Once demand has been created, then it's vitally important that you're in a good position to capture, hopefully, a large portion of it. Demand capture can happen in a variety of ways, of course, but none are more important to optimize than your website, really. And crafting a website user experience, which of course combines copy, design, and code that all need to be aligned to the goal, that's optimized to turn interest into opportunity and to generate high intent leads from people who are serious about buying, can really step change your results when it comes to inbound demand generation success. And finally, once a buyer has acted on their intent and their demand has been captured, it stands to reason that from that point forward, the rest of the experience should be seamless, friction-free, and consistent both with buyer expectations, either of your category or product or business, and any promises you've made in the run-up to all of that happening. And the sales process and the sales handover is a broad area in itself. It strays into CRM technology and integrated stacks, but fundamentals to think about and consider are fast and effective responses, routing to the best person quickly so that people can get the information they need, and so on, and simply making it easy for people to do business with you as opposed to difficult. Now, do all of that well, optimize that for what the modern buyer is looking for, to the production of revenue and pipeline over leads, and you're in a position to start to drive increased inbound demand from your inbound marketing, so to speak. But to some of you, all of this may sound similar to marketing you're already doing, or marketing strategies that you're familiar with and considering implementing or have stopped implementing. So we thought it would be worthwhile to describe it in a bit more detail, specifically how inbound demand generation differs from those other things that you might be familiar with. So unlike outbound marketing, but a little bit like inbound marketing, inbound demand generation is about attracting buyers to you still, creating an inbound journey to your door that's paved with your willingness to share your knowledge and educate your ideal buyer before they buy from you. Buyers discover you on their terms, and outbound tactics like data purchases, mass email, cold in-mail, cold calling, direct mail all take a back seat. Essentially, we don't use interruption tactics that steal attention away without permission, and we don't buy data that intrudes on buyers' privacy, and we put buyers fully in control of their engagement with us, which is what they want and what they prefer. And we do that safe in the knowledge that we're building affinity and preference, as we just mentioned, for our brand through the demand creation activities that carry over to put us in a winning position during the rest of the purchase process. So that's how inbound demand generation differs from the outbound marketing strategies of old. Unlike inbound marketing, however, inbound demand generation is not focused on prematurely converting the buyer into a lead so that they can be nurtured, aka spammed, and scored with the hope that it will somehow make them want to buy. Inbound demand generation acknowledges that the majority of pipeline already comes from buyers who remain anonymous up until the point of high intent inquiry and is optimized entirely for that outcome. The problem isn't your nurture sequence, it's that buyers don't want to be nurtured, so they're not going to enter the pool that results in them being nurtured in the first place. So by pivoting away from that goal, that lead generation, lead nurturing goal, you're able to do things in a way that's optimized for the buyers that do go on to buy from you, and produce far more of them as a result. Now, explaining how inbound demand generation differs from demand generation is a little trickier because it means so many different things to different people. To some, demand generation is very focused on top of the funnel awareness. And inbound demand generation differs from that in that it's really a holistic and integrated approach to creating the full inbound path to purchase from before discovery all the way through to decision and beyond. So unlike effort that is focused purely on reach or creating awareness or even generating leads in some situations, it's about getting buyers all the way through the purchase process, into your pipeline and hopefully beyond. To some others, demand generation is actually about the creation of pipeline, but essentially through outbound methods, a lot of data purchase, a lot of cold calling, and so on. And as we've described, inbound demand generation is anything but. It generates pipeline through the inbound methods that align so well with modern buyers' preferences and behaviors, in the current era that we're in. So differs fundamentally from those three things and helps you to drive your pipeline, drive your revenue through the inbound philosophy, which still holds a lot of value amongst our modern buying audience. So Dan, would you mind taking over at this point and talking a bit about what makes inbound demand generation so effective today and the advantages it creates for businesses adopting it?
Yeah, sure. I've just noticed if my webcam is really laggy, just shout at me and I can swap it for something else. We are live, so this happens. But
go for it.
Okay, just shout. So yeah, basically I want to cover why inbound demand generation is so effective for converting today's buyers. And I really wanted to go back to this graphic of today's buyer journey from Gartner. And, this just shows how complex buyer journeys can be. Buyers use different channels in different ways at different times, sometimes repeating actions and jumping around in such unexpected and unpredictable ways. So when you don't look at the buyer journey like this, and instead you look as a, traditional linear path, they do step 1, step 2, step 3 in a straight line, and you miss this complex journey, you end up also missing critical elements on the journey too. So instead of focusing on the big picture here, you hyper focus on forcing buyers down artificial funnels to follow a path that you have formed for them to take. And this forces buyers to do things that they don't like and breaks their individual preference for discovery, research, and evaluation. And really, it results in them looking for information elsewhere because then that supports the journey that they want to take. So my point is here, the buyer journey is complex. It covers a huge amount of interactions, and that means you need to find a method that somehow touches all of these interactions and aligns with the complexity of the journey that you can see here. And that is where inbound demand generation comes in. So what you're seeing here is an example of inbound demand generation activities. And I want to talk you through exactly how this method aligns to the complex buyer journey that I just showed, the graphic from Gartner that we have today. So firstly, on the left, you'll see the 3 stages of demand generation that Phil just spoke through: create, capture, and convert. And firstly, you've already done a great thing by mapping out your tactics and activities against these stages. You're putting yourself in a really good position to influence as much of the buyer journey as possible, not just focusing on capturing demand through search or converting it. You're influencing as much as you can, right? Now, on the far right-hand side, you'll see the block of branding, technology, and optimization. And obviously, these things run throughout everything you do. They don't just operate in one stage. Branding even goes beyond marketing. It's the heart of your entire business and defines how customers perceive you. Technology, enables you to scale, report, collaborate across your business. And then with everything that you do, you can't just set and forget it. Continuously optimize everything and test, report, and then repeat that. So when it comes to the actual juicy stuff in the middle, the activity, you'll see that the arrows are trying to illustrate everything works together. There are no siloed efforts here. You don't have blogs targeting a certain ICP emails nurturing a different group of contacts, social channels up in, space, targeting and talking to a different audience. Everything is integrated and works together for one single output, which is high intent website conversions. That's buyers knocking on your door and asking to talk to you, whether that's, a talk to sales form or a demo request, a trial. No matter what, it's buyers interested and explicitly saying they're interested in your offering. And this approach brings you as close as possible to the complex buyer journey we just saw again, because it aligns to the same goal. All buyers want to do is learn, research, and evaluate in their own preferred ways, and then contact you when they're ready. And all we're trying to do here is give buyers everything they need to learn, research, and evaluate, and then give them the easiest path through an exceptional website experience to contact you when they're ready on their own terms. So hopefully that gives you some context into what marketing on a day-to-day basis would look like through an inbound demand generation lens. But I suppose if you're doubtful about this approach and maybe a bit skeptical of focusing all of your effort on getting high intent leads and maybe sacrificing those precious gated ebook leads or LinkedIn lead gen leads, all you have to do is look at the data. So this is called a split funnel analysis. Well, it's a graphical version of that. And what this does is split out all of your low intent lead sources. So like gated content, webinars, events, outbound, content syndication, basically any lead that hasn't explicitly asked to talk to you about your offering. And then split these out in a separate funnel from your high intent leads, those that have come to your website, submitted the form to say, hi, I'm interested in your product or service. And once you split these out separately, all you need to do is compare the progression of low intent leads through your lifecycle stages with the progression of high intent leads through your lifecycle stages. So on the low intent side, you're almost definitely going to see a high number of leads at the top of the funnel. So you might be thinking, great, we're getting loads of leads through gated content and all of this stuff. But what you're likely to see is a minuscule and sometimes non-existent conversion all the way through to customer. Whereas your high intent funnel is likely to show a lot less leads at the top, but a much better conversion all the way through to customer. And I suppose this is obvious stuff, right? It's nothing groundbreaking. Leads that explicitly ask to talk to you convert better because they have explicitly, given their interest in your product. It's nothing groundbreaking here. But actually by doing this, you'll soon see that you're pouring 60, 70, 80, 90% of your marketing budget into generating those low intent leads that never close or convert. You're pouring money into events and webinars and LinkedIn lead gen ads and content syndication, and you're almost focusing none of your budget into generating those high intent leads that actually account for most of your pipeline. So simply by doing this analysis creates the clear case to shift your focus from creating low intent leads to creating high intent leads that will actually convert. So how does inbound demand generation give businesses a competitive advantage? So overall, the biggest commercial advantage that adopting inbound demand generation delivers is sales related, right? It's increased sales velocity and win rates. Ultimately, the goal of marketing is to make sales easier and more effective. And one of the key things that inbound demand generation does is change where your salespeople focus their time. In a lead generation or traditional inbound marketing model, sales will be inundated with all kinds of leads, all mixed together, which is what this graphic is kind of showing. On the left, you've got all of these people and only a couple pulled out, right? And you've got all of these leads from webinars, gated content, event stands, content syndication, mixed together with the high intent leads who have actually asked to talk to you. And, just doing this and this old approach, results in sales spending a huge amount of time sifting through these leads who are never going to buy from you, and then they can't prioritize or spend enough time with the high intent leads who are ready to buy. But by implementing inbound demand generation, a couple of things will happen. So firstly, you'll almost definitely see a reduction in the overall volume of leads that marketing passes to sales, right? Compared to what was there before, definitely. And that's because marketing is no longer focused on converting as many leads as possible, as quickly as possible, to get them into your database so you can nurture them, send them spam, and then score them. The only time that you'd actually be capturing details to pass to sales is when the buyers themselves has asked for that to happen. And whilst it might seem like a drop in performance when looking at lead volume, when you actually look at the overall output of these, the performance should only be positive. Because instead of chasing down leads that are never going to buy from you, sales can, put their time and heavy focus on leads that are much, much more likely to close. But here's, the magic is long term. When you look at the big picture and long-term results, your inbound leads start to look like this. So, by this point, you've been running inbound demand generation for some time. You learn how to get more of those high intent leads. You dig into the self-reported attribution and other data to understand where they're coming from and what influences their journey. And then you can maximize effort in those places. So you're no longer worried about generating low intent leads from those other places. And doing this comes with a consistent flow of those high intent inbound leads that come with a strong likelihood of being opportunities just naturally. And that means your sales team doesn't have to focus on, early stage education for those leads. They can focus on discovery, qualification, presentation, and negotiation of actual deals. And with that comes 4 main advantages in itself. It will generate high quality pipeline because you're getting leads who have already carried out due diligence on your offering. So they come to you for validation and confirmation of you being able to deliver rather than, education. You'll have shorter sales cycles because your sales team is spending more of their time with better fit prospects so they can qualify in or out much faster. And it gives sales more time to, concentrate on those opportunities that can close. You have increased win rates. When you think about it, by default, your pipeline is going to contain a far higher volume of best fit opportunities because you're not pushing through all the crappy low intent leads. And your sales team can provide a compelling, if they can provide a compelling path to purchase, of course, then your win rate percentage should increase accordingly with that. And lastly, you'll be seeing a better return on marketing investment because, better fit conversions who are better educated on your ability to meet their needs, with a sales team that has the time to effectively progress each of these faster, means that your MQL to revenue acquisition metrics also increase. So what does that mean for a business? Well, it leads to both your revenue increasing and also your customer acquisition costs going in the right direction too. And I suppose all in all, that's just going to give you more profitability to then focus on the areas that matter, developing your product or processes or go-to-market capability, and overall give you a stronger presence in the market that you actually want to serve. So I know we're just talking through this today, but we thought it'd also be good to show real-world examples of this in action. Like it has been done before, we've proved this. So there are a bunch of examples out there of real results from our clients that they've had from inbound demand generation. And, Phil has seen these and, been part of these firsthand while leading at Blend. So yeah, Phil, I think you're going to share a few of those examples.
Yeah. Just before I do, I think I'm going to say that, when thinking about that split funnel analysis and the pattern trend that you see there, I've seen that so many times firsthand. And as you said, Dan, it's usually not surprising to marketers or salespeople or businesses in general, just how well their high intent leads convert or go on to close. But it is shocking to them just how badly the leads the top of the funnel leads, fail to close. And it's realizing that and understanding it and adapting to it that is so powerful. And I've seen time and time again the positive impact of shifting marketing and your position on it to prioritize those high intent leads and those purchase ready conversions. Seen that many times over. Just by way of example, a couple of stats from case studies that we've got on the website, so to speak. For one client, a software company, it was reported that our approach to inbound marketing, as we were calling it then, inbound demand generation, resulted in a 250% increase in revenue from inbound leads. And what this really reflects is, focusing marketing and sales on high intent lead generation and conversion, as opposed to simply lead generation, increases the revenue that is realized from those leads that are still coming to you via inbound channels. So fewer leads overall, but a higher number of much higher intent and good fit leads on which you focus your sales efforts, from which you thereby realize a greatly increased inbound revenue figure. So really compelling results from those guys. For Safety Bank, when we worked with Safety Bank, we produced a website that was optimized for demand capture. That's a really important part of the process and can have a governing effect over your entire sort of results, if you like. We produced a website that was optimized for demand capture and ungated content that was easily promoted and discovered and consumed by serious buyers without converting. And lo and behold, it resulted in a pretty quick increase of 400% to their demo requests. And as a SaaS vendor in the health and safety space, what more could you want other than a 400% increase in requests for demos of your software? Absolutely brilliant results. And then more recently, we worked with Supply Pilot. And with this company, we helped them actually rebrand and reposition themselves. We were part of their process of doing that. We talked earlier about the important role that brand plays in inbound demand generation. And so we helped them sort of take that to market through a new website, which is acting as the destination of their demand creation efforts. And together, all of that created a 34% increase in high intent MQLs. And we can't underestimate or understate the value of high intent amongst your leads, because they will turn into revenue at a rate so much higher than that of your low intent leads, shall we say. It really is significant. And if you optimize your marketing for the production of those high intent leads and MQLs, the impact on your pipeline and the impact on your revenue from marketing sources, from marketing investment, can be significant.
Yeah. And that Supply Pilot one was mainly just a website, right? So
the work we did, for instance, was a website. And that can, when you've got demand being created somehow, ideally by yourselves, and you've got people finding you, discovering you, and you let them consume your content freely, then your website can convert a significant number of them into declared high interest leads that you can have a really meaningful conversation with and potentially quite quickly turn them into revenue.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Phil. So right, here you have it. This is inbound demand generation. And, as we've discussed, this is what we believe and have seen is the best approach for generating a consistent flow of high intent leads, pipeline, and revenue for your business. So we're going to kind of wrap things up a bit here, and then we'll go into questions and some other stuff. But if you've enjoyed this and, you can kind of see inbound demand generation as a methodology suitable for your business and something you can implement to drive growth, like you've seen, we've also got some, handy little resources here. We've got a complete page on inbound demand generation. So this mainly goes into, detail that we've gone into today, and kind of, bounces off of that. So it could be a good destination for you to, go back to every now and again. We've also got a good guide, and there's also a downloadable spreadsheet here to help you get started with a split funnel analysis. Kind of guides you through what it is, how you use it, how you actually set it up. We've got a podcast called Demand Decoded. So these are bi-weekly events, basically, that we then push to the podcast, where we dive into a whole host of different topics relating to inbound demand generation. We've got different people from Blend talking in detail about strategies and tactics. So like some of the last episodes include how to amplify your marketing with LinkedIn and Google Ads, how to master your brand's tone of voice, killer website UX tips, why lead scoring doesn't work and what to do instead. A range of topics that all go into more detail on the topic of inbound demand generation from a strategic and tactical point of view. And yeah, all of these are recorded live on LinkedIn. So if you did want to come to these bi-weekly, you can have your questions answered live there. And then they're available, on all podcast platforms and YouTube as well. So then, lastly, hopefully it goes without saying as well that, of course, if you wanted to, find out more, then we're here for a chat. You can message Phil or I if you want to get into the nitty gritty of inbound demand generation, or, reach out to Blend. We're happy to help. So I suppose let's dive into a few questions. And I think Dan, who is part of our team, if you can post some of those resources in LinkedIn whilst we go through these, that would be really helpful. So, right, we've got a few questions, and I'll try and start from the early ones and work our way down. So we've got a bit of time.
Reward their patience.
Yeah. Right. So
I've been seeing that number go up and getting.
They've all muddled up a bit, but let's start with Paul. Right. So basically, can you explain what inbound marketing is in your terms? Do you want to take that one, Phil? I'll also change that.
Inbound marketing is, well, lots of different things, but for the most part, it was a shift from outbound interruption-based tactics to inbound permission-based tactics. So it's a broad set of tactics that integrate into a strategy that use content to get discovered by ideally buyers who might purchase something from you or something in your category, earn their attention, bring them into your world, on their own terms, and then get them to voluntarily share their contact details with you so that you have permission to essentially email them. And then that permission is the start of a journey of disseminating content to them across a number of channels simultaneously. So they'll continue to use search, they'll continue to click on some ads, they'll continue to use social to find new content, but you will also supply them with content via email. And so inbound marketing is really about using content, I think, to generate leads that you hope will be good fit customers for your business. And then it evolved, I suppose, to really become synonymous with nurturing those contacts through the purchase process. And then that became synonymous with scoring their behavior as they went through that nurturing process and handing them over to sales when they met a certain, tier of score. But it really was focused and I think constrained on that part of the journey around the voluntary sharing of contact information. Didn't really talk a lot about the website experience that you need to provide in order to convert, someone's interest into an opportunity. Didn't really talk about that pre-demand being created phase of demand creation, and it appealed and it made a lot of sense because it did reflect the fact that buyers were less responsive to those surprise emails that they got because they're on some list somewhere that you could buy, and so on. And the time long ago when you could literally pick up the phone and sell something to somebody, was a really good solution to that. But as buyer behavior has progressed and technology has advanced to facilitate that buyer behavior, it's lost it's lost its efficacy in terms of pipeline production. I hope that answers the question.
That was a good explanation. Cool. So short and sweet journey. what markets did you study for this? Do you want to say that, Phil?
Well, I mean, study. So this is the product of servicing quite a high number of clients over a 10-year period. You know, we started the agency in 2010. We adopted HubSpot as a platform and inbound marketing or content marketing 2013. Through 2015, 2016, 2017, we were really starting to feel frustration with our ability to help customers turn leads into revenue and pipeline. And so each of our customers that we've worked with in sectors like telecommunications, life sciences, SaaS, enterprise expense management, a whole variety, you know, we saw the pattern of leads that turn into buyers abysmal, buyers that remain anonymous but appear on the website when they're ready, fantastic, leaning into that over time. And we've been doing that again and again and again. So, you know, we don't have the benefit of large data studies to back that up. I'm pleased to say that there are other parties talking about similar topics online that either have or claim to have, you know, large data sets that support it. But, you know, I've seen it repeated without exception in B2B marketing amongst SMEs and the enterprises we work with. And furthermore, you know, I'm still yet to meet a marketer that was totally satisfied with their lead nurturing, their lead scoring, you know, their sequences and so on. And then the final sort of nail in the lid of this, I suppose, is the fact that I'm a buyer, right? Dan's a buyer, you're a buyer. And so often we as marketers sit down at our desk and start doing things that simply don't work on us when we're in the buying cycle. And we've tried to lean away from those things and adapt and prioritize the things that do work, which is free consumption of content, digest it out across channels like social in ways that I can consume natively, and so on and so forth. So it's been proven through aggregate experience over many different engagements in many different ways, not always the complete package, as it were, but each of those 4 key stages, you know, we can point to the success of them.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, in terms of what we studied, it was experience, right? Working with different clients in multiple sectors. Our own experience, when was it, Phil? You ungated all content in like 2017. So that experience, and now, you know, we don't gate anything, like, but it's, you know, we still drive a consistent number of high intent leads and pipeline without gating content or doing lead generation of any kind.
It's a great question. It's the product of experience, you know, and something that, you know, we have sort of bet on for some time. You know, although we've been calling ourselves an inbound marketing agency for some time, in reality, we've been doing inbound demand generation for, you know, quite a while now. So that's why I'm so excited to, you know, do this event, lift the curtain off this and share it in the hopes that more people will implement it and see the impact of it.
Yeah. Cool. Another question here. I don't like how LinkedIn does this sometimes, that we can't see names. It depends on privacy policies, I think, which is really annoying. But great question again. You mentioned gated landing pages are a no. Is that across the board or depending on content? So, well, I think, Phil, you've spoken before about optional downloads, right? So there might be something in here, but I think for the most part, we're saying that in an inbound demand generation approach, either way, you're focusing on generating a pipeline and revenue. And to be able to generate those things, you don't need to gate your content. Actually, it's much better if you ungate it and have no gated landing page so that buyers can consume it freely in their own preferred way at the time they want without fear of being spammed and followed up by sales. So anything to add?
I would probably just say that, you know, marketers rarely tend to operate in absolutes, right? So saying that you absolutely never gate anything or that you never collect data in return for a copy of it, it's like that we shouldn't worry ourselves with trying to achieve an absolute state. But if you go to a lot of effort to create a extremely valuable piece of content and you then gate it, and that's the only way to get access to it, you are more or less ensuring these days that your ideal customer will not see it, because they will not risk sharing their contact details because they've been burned so many times before. On average, the quality of content that we download in return for our details is subpar. Now, I know that everybody watching, they're not in that category, right? They create content that's truly valuable, groundbreaking, educational, and so on. Show it to the world. Put it out there publicly so that your ideal customer can come along any day of the week, read it freely, come away with a great sense of credibility and of your expertise, and act on it when they're ready. And don't fall into the trap of ensuring that they never see it because they've got to fill in a form in order to just get access to it.
Yeah. So pretty much it's a no across the board.
Pretty much.
Cool. Right. I'll navigate past the spammy comments. That seems to be apparent. Cool. This is a great question. Can you talk a little bit about demand creation through paid ads perspective? If you have to design a quick funnel and use Google Ads as a major platform, what would be the ideal funnel and ad structure for Google Ads?
Well, this is a topic you talked about with our resident expert on the subject, Christiana, the other day. And so I'll just tee you up if that's all right, which is to say that predominantly Google Ads, PPC, which are in search, are more effective at the demand capture stage of the purchase process nowadays than at the demand creation phase of the process. Would you agree, Dan?
I mean, yes, definitely. The best thing to do, really would be to go check out episode 9 of Demand Decoded, which is on LinkedIn and Google Ads, and goes into quite a lot of detail about how to use those platforms for demand creation, demand capture, inbound demand generation, basically, with Chrissy, who's an absolute expert on Google Ads. So go check that out. It's really insightful.
Paid plays a very important role in demand creation, but typically we would see that being paid social rather than paid search. There's always exceptions to those rules, but episode 9, Demand Decoded, covers it in detail.
Yeah. Cool. Another question here. Again, sorry, we don't have the name, but great question anyway. I understand the need for demand gen. How would you deal with sales who have targets to reach and can't necessarily wait to implement and generate that demand? I mean, this is I feel like we speak about this daily, Phil. We've spoken about this quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, so we've been fairly lucky that we work with companies that are sort of on an upward. We've worked predominantly with customers that are on a rising trend and don't necessarily have large incumbent sales teams that we've got to keep fed and keep busy. So we've been able to pivot this, without too much consequence. But we know from others in the industry that it's hard to do when that sales team is there and they're expecting leads and they're measured to some degree on how many leads they contact to. That requires more effort and more thought. It's going to take senior stakeholder conviction and convincing to refocus the effort of that sales team and that function, once the change has been implemented. You probably don't want to implement the change and then refocus because the lag time will be quite, significant. But, ultimately you should be able to build a case using split funnel analysis for the benefit of focusing marketing on high intent leads that close at a much higher rate, identify how much resource that's going to free up and target that potentially on another segment of your market or on another category of buyer, your enterprise sales, for example. Strongly recommend that you follow Alice DeCourcy from Cognism on LinkedIn. She talks about that specific subject. She's CMO at Cognism and she's addressed this. We chatted about it and actually she's really good insight into that. We are most definitely the marketing experts, and so I would not want to claim otherwise. Alice can steer you on the sales transformation that needs to happen. But you are right, it does need to happen in cases where high lead volumes have been the norm, and unless you change measurement and KPIs and internal understanding, you could run into some issues.
Yeah, I found the conversation that you had with Alice on LinkedIn, where she basically says, they pivoted some sales into an outbound motion to focus on high value accounts and then shifted, things around basically to focus on different areas.
Yeah. Perfect.
Cool. So next one, again, sorry, no name, darn LinkedIn. Do you have any recommendations on a segmented approach, small, SME, and large? I'm assuming that's a segmented approach to inbound demand generation. I don't know where that came in.
Don't know, Dan. Does anything spring to mind on your part? I mean, from my point of view, I think as information has become democratized and platforms have become ubiquitous and universal, most businesses are doing similar things these days in order to attract their buyer. So whether you are a small business or an SME or a large business, you can drive demand this way. Whether your customer is a small business, an SME or a large business, you can reach them and convert them this way. There are obviously some purchase processes that will take a different path, whether it's the tender process or the RFP process. But building brand affinity, building preference for your brand before a purchase is even in consideration, doesn't do any harm. And it gets back a little bit to the roots of what marketing, is and always was. We talked yesterday, Dan, about how, the fact that everything has become measurable or become performance-based is not necessarily aligned to what marketing is supposed to do when it comes to helping buyers choose solutions for their problems, right? Measurability does not necessarily equal efficacy. And so focusing marketing and sales on high intent leads and revenue, can help you to deprioritize a little bit some of those more vanity metrics that are synonymous with marketing campaigns, performance campaigns, and focus on creating the content that buyers really will, gobble up because it's informative and educational and maybe even entertaining, and put your brand in top position when the purchase process begins.
Yeah, I think from a segmented approach, you might have a segmentation in terms of like messaging, in which case you can gear like your paid LinkedIn campaigns or whatever to have that different messaging, and like in terms of PPC you can go after different terms if that's what those segments use. Like if small businesses search for something, SMEs search for something else, and enterprise search for something else, you can segment that way. But overall, the actual methodology itself works across any segment, I suppose.
I think so.
So Ravi, short and sweet here. How do you classify a lead as a low intent or high intent lead? Well, I think I kind of covered this in the talk. A low intent lead is somebody that hasn't explicitly expressed interest in your offering. So, they've come through, they've downloaded a piece of gated content, or they've attended a webinar like this. Like, Ravi, you're not a high intent lead to us, right? Like, you're not a lead to us anyway. But yeah, low intent leads are people that haven't actually asked to talk to you, right? But you've somehow got their data. A high intent lead is somebody that has explicitly said, I am interested in your product or service. They've submitted a form on your website to say, I want to talk to you about this, or I want a demo on this, or, requested a trial, for example.
Yeah. It might be worth adding that, quite a lot of people are talking about the struggles that lead generation is facing nowadays. And MQL tends to get thrown under the same bus quite rapidly because so many businesses are measuring marketing on creating scored MQLs or even just top of the funnel MQLs and passing MQLs to sales, that MQL and lead both get sort of tarnished. MQL, in my book, is still a perfectly good label metric to flag those high intent leads, the ones that have basically gone as far in the marketing journey as they possibly can and have reached a point where they're saying, yes, I would like to try your product, or I would like to talk to your sales team about, a purchase or something of that nature. And they are clearly, visibly, undeniably expressing their intent to purchase something. the possibility they might purchase from you, and their interest in what you offer, and that's a high intent lead.
Yeah, nice. This is a long one. I'm going to shorten the name to Vesco, I'm assuming. So this seems that in order for businesses to adopt such approach, they need to go through a process and culture changes, since it requires a mindset change. Do companies need to create a strategy for how to adopt all of these changes over a certain period of time? It will be different from business to business, so identifying these will be crucial for success. So I suppose the question is, do companies need to create a strategy, that kind of, or almost a roadmap for how to adopt these changes over a period of time?
So I think in the situations where there's that sales function, that mature sales function that's used to working a certain way, and as a result, marketing is measured a certain way, then yes, it is sensible, and it would be very sensible to develop a plan, because the change is going to require multiple teams to update how they think, sign up to a new way of doing things, and work together to overcome the kinks. Now, the starting point should be that split funnel analysis, because once you've done that, you can't put it back in the box, right? You can't undo the discovery that leads go nowhere and buyers go everywhere, so to speak. And so start with the analysis, prove the case with data, build the business case with data, and then start exploring with senior stakeholders, with sales leadership, what would it look like? And you can, obviously run some scenarios with the numbers. If we drop leads by X, but they're all MQLs instead, and we change our website to generate more of those, and then we start producing content to produce more of those, what could we do with our resource on the sales front? Then yes, you're going to have a more successful change. Within marketing on its own, I don't think the shift to inbound demand generation is a huge upheaval, because it's using a lot of the same muscles that we already use for, truth be told, a more satisfying outcome that's enjoyable to produce as well, right? So, for us marketers, I think switching to inbound demand generation doesn't present too big a challenge. But yeah, it's when your organization is, operating on a leads basis, a plan is sensible.
Yeah, I think, like you say, planning for the eventualities that are going to happen. You will have a drop in leads. Sales will need something else to do rather than cold call leads that come through gated content. So actually planning out how you're going to shift their focus over, the period of time that you're reducing your lead generation, and then where they pivot their focus during that time. So then you come to, the end goal.
It's worth saying as well that it's not a sales failure. I strongly believe that it's not a sales failure, but when you see how effective or ineffective they are at closing those top of the funnel low intent leads, you won't really be satisfied with them spending their effort doing it much longer in most cases. So it will motivate and incentivize the change, because when you look at how much time is spent, how much activity is going into that, and the revenue it's producing versus the others, and that's a big driver for change.
Yeah. Cool. I know we're over time, but we can just answer a few more of these, I think, whilst we're here, and then maybe pick up a few afterwards. So again, another LinkedIn user. Sorry, we don't have your name, but thank you for the question. Roughly how long do you think it takes a business to implement a demand generation process, from internal buy-in to generating high interest leads?
Well, that is a how long is a piece of string question, because there's quite a few variables in there. One is, how strong is the resistance that you face within the organization? That could move your change management process from being 3 months to 9 months to 12 months and beyond. If for some reason there is strong resistance to the program and difficulty getting buy-in. But as we've said before, and again, data is your friend there. From a pivoting your sort of execution of marketing to inbound demand generation, again, it does depend a little bit on what resources you have available, so how quickly you can access the resources to refactor content into ungated pillar pages, how long it takes you to develop a strategy for demand creation content that's native to social platforms, and how quickly you can start producing those. But that's probably in most cases. And the other variable is, of course, how much of that you've already got to hand, as in how much content you have that you can quickly ungate and just get started. So in 2017, we basically, came in one day and tasked our team with producing a pillar page template so that we could take all the ebooks that had generated thousands of leads, people seem to love them, and publish them freely. That process took probably a week all told, because we had those resources in our great marketing team, and we weren't precious actually about fine detail at that point. It was more important to get this change implemented. And I think that's another thing. You can always tolerate, you can refine later. If you need something to be done now, get it done. You can always refine it later. On the subject of pillar pages, they don't need to be highly produced, very glossy pieces. To me, it's just as good if they're essentially akin to a blog post, which is easy to read, navigable content, and you can produce many of them, as opposed to taking days, weeks, months to get one out the door. So depending on resources, depending on resistance, depending on your back catalogue of usable content, it could take months, 3 months to really feel like you've implemented it. Could take a lot longer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it depends, doesn't it, on that internal buy-in. Some people will be like, wow, that's our split funnel analysis. Like, we're getting nothing from these low intent leads. Like, go for it right now. And in terms of, generating high intent leads, you could see that almost instantly, right? If you're, shifting your focus on PPC, say from like top of funnel, keywords that are just driving traffic to low intent pages, to then driving that to high intent keywords that buyers are using to research and evaluate products at that time, then it could be instant. It depends on the tactics that you deploy, I suppose. Cool. Let's answer a few more. So how long in average inbound marketing how long can it take for inbound marketing to be effective from the beginning in terms of creating incremental pipeline versus traditional methods? Well, let's take that as inbound demand generation, right? How long does it take to be effective compared to, let's say, inbound marketing?
So both inbound demand generation and inbound marketing are sort of broad strategies that comprise a range of tactics that can take time to implement and can take time to show results. But within both, there are sometimes, opportunities that can have a quicker or an immediate impact. So, for example, we've often seen over the years that we've been doing this, that one of the tactics that you will use within inbound demand generation or inbound marketing is SEO. Yeah, we want to be discovered by our buyers when they're using search to research their processes. And it's not unusual to find out that SEO for a business is not optimized around the keywords that buyers use in the search process. So if you fix that problem, you can have an overnight impact on the quality of traffic and sometimes the quantity that's coming to your website straight away. So we've always looked for the opportunities within a program that we say might take 6 to 9 months to really start to show, groundswell of results. We hope to see an impact immediately from X, Y, or Z. The other thing that can take a bit longer to produce but can have a whopping impact once you do is your website user experience. Now, for some, that might be incremental changes like remove the burger menu, ditch the slider, come clean about the conversion offer. If it's not a demo, don't say demo. Remove the friction from that customer journey once they're on your site to the pipeline. And again, you can have a pretty significant impact quickly on what we at Blend would call MQL generation rate, high intent lead production. And you can then get to work on the other stages of capturing and creating demand, which will almost certainly take longer and require, compounding effort over a period of time: content creation, promotion, building a reputation for consistency, and so on. So the answer is, some things can happen very quickly, and it's always nice when they do. But largely speaking, the best marketing takes time to work.
Yeah. Cool. Let's answer one more, and then for all of the others, maybe we'll answer them through LinkedIn, just because, we're significantly over time now, as usual. But so let's take this one from Brian Logan. So how do you compare inbound demand gen and account-based marketing? Like, great question. Do you want to have a take, Phil?
Well, it's a good question. I haven't really considered a terrible amount. So we've always thought that account-based marketing and inbound exist on a spectrum of sorts, where inbound marketing, the sort of traditional way, is sorry, my screen keeps going off. Just want to get you guys back. Is account-based marketing at a vertical level. You're talking to everybody in the vertical that you target, through a variety of mechanisms. And as you shrink that audience down through one to lots and one to many and one to one, you end up in account-based marketing. But again, you're going to use content that resonates with the buyer at different stages of the purchase process to achieve your results. So inbound demand generation is essentially an iteration or an evolution of that broader market approach, but it would be easy enough, I think, to pivot the emphasis that you place on discoverability via search versus promoting your content to the right audience on social. The emphasis you put on events versus creating a community, for example, to shift that towards being more classically ABM. So I think there's a lot of commonality and a lot of similarity possible, and you can adapt it. But it is essentially a new approach to inbound marketing that is aimed at addressing a large audience of potential customers and getting them into your door. Would you agree with me, Dan, or do you think I've missed something?
No, I think largely agree. And we're not experts on account-based marketing anyway, so we should throw that in there. But obviously, being in marketing, we know what it is and a bit about it. But I think from a one-to-many and one-to-few perspective, you could see the overlap with inbound demand generation, like the tactics that you deploy in terms of distributing, on LinkedIn, say, to a targeted audience of these accounts and whatnot, still applies. The methodology still applies in terms of what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. But when you get to that kind of one-to-one level where you might be sending direct mail and using other tactics, like inbound demand generation is better suited to targeting wider audiences.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. Well, that was brilliant. And yeah, we've been really, really excited to do this and kind of, get questions and put inbound demand generation out there and let everyone kind of, explore the methodology and approach that we've been using for ourselves and customers for so long. So thank you so much for joining us. And obviously, if you want to kind of dig into particular topics, there's Demand Decoded, the other resources that Dan added in the comments. Dive into those or hit us up and we can chat about it. So this has been why inbound demand generation is the future of marketing, and it's been brilliant. So hopefully, see you on something else.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Dan.